Hi, Nicquel.
Hello.
Hi, Nicquel. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you, Nikkia. Can you hear me well?
Wait, can you see me?
Your voice kind of went out.
Can you see me?
I can see you. I can see you and I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Busy.
As usual.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like our middle names now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy right now. I mean, between Georgia reopening and the Ahmaud Arbery case, it's been like nonstop for me. So
yeah. Have you been like out chasing stories?
Yeah, well, I went out last week. I went to South Georgia last week for a story I did about Albany, Georgia, which was hit really hard from the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I did travel there. It was more so a day trip. I came back when I was done. But aside from that, I've been doing as much as I can from home. Trying to avoid having to go out, and it's sort of worked out where, our folks have been really open to doing phone interviews. So it's been it's been good. Still been able to do some good stories. So
good.
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna start off. Obviously, I'm gonna give an overview, and then I'm gonna turn it over. So you'll be the first one that that will introduce themselves, followed by Jonathan, then Gabriela.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. How long does the panel go for?
It's until 1 o'clock. So okay. Want to try to stay on schedule for it to end right at 1 o'clock on the dot.
Okay. No, that I was just making sure because yeah, I have a story I'm working on, so I wanted to just sort of time how long this was going to be. So okay.
Yeah, totally get it.
So now, the people who join the call, can we see them, or how does that work?
No, they'll see us, but we won't see them. So as the moderator, I'll see all of the questions that are going to be coming in. So I'll have kind of an idea of what they're going to be asking, and I'll just kind of have, as they come in, also have some mock audience questions as well, in case we don't get a lot of questions, which I doubt.
Are you guys expecting a lot of people?
Yeah, we had 134.
Okay, good. That's
Hi,
a good
Gabriela.
number of people registered.
Hi.
How are you?
What a morning.
Busy?
Well, I guess I should say full disclosure. I am PMSing, so it's not a good.
Oh, and I should tell you, Gabriela, that we are recording.
Oh.
We already have a couple of attendees that have joining a little bit earlier. But I appreciate the candidness.
Well, it's journalism. What are you gonna do? I actually we were also having our company meeting on the other end, so that's why I was so a little bit late.
No worries. Other than that, how are you doing?
I'm okay. The first
How are
time.
you coping? I know we'll uncover more of that as we go into the conversation.
Well, if you'd like some goss. No, just, I think it's the uncertainty of just our office culture going forward. So we don't really know what's going on, but, trying to figure it out day by day.
Yeah, you actually saw, I don't know, you guys have probably saw the CNN shuttered their doors until September.
Who?
CNN, all of their bureaus are supposedly closed until September, from what I understand. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they had a couple anchors that caught coronavirus in the last several weeks. So, I mean, maybe that's partially why. I mean, because it looks like, I think it was Chris Cuomo and Brooke Baldwin. And so I wonder, if they were going into the office or the studios and maybe it was spreading. I don't know.
Yeah. That's crazy. Well, hello to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining early. We're just waiting right at noon to get started. And we'll go ahead and kick off with things. We are just waiting on one more panelist to join, but we'll get started momentarily.
Okay. Is this okay lighting wise?
Great lighting.
Thank you.
What about for me? Can you guys see me?
A rustic vibe. I love the background. Great.
Oh.
Yeah,
Nicquel,
I actually,
she's in an art gallery. I love it.
I'm so thankful. We bought this piece of art right before the pandemic, and it's kind of worked out because now I'm doing all these Zoom calls and Zoom interviews. So it's like,
yeah, I love it. That's beautiful.
And thank you. I haven't yet experimented with Zoom backgrounds yet, which I know some people have, but
yeah,
they have like different cool backgrounds you can do with Zoom. So
yeah, they're actually really cool. Actually, the co-working space that we're a part of, Industrious, they kind of release like their own like cool backgrounds, like for anyone that's having FOMO of missing the co-working space. It's cute.
Okay, I see the attendees. It kind of looks like it's mostly maybe you guys.
So far we have 5, so that's good. We're gonna give everyone 5 more minutes to join. Hello, Katie Kern. Katie Kern is our agency partner in Big Ideas connoisseur at Media Frenzy Global. She says, hello, everyone.
have you guys had any conversations about going back to the office yet, Nikkia?
We have not. We're kind of playing it by ear with everything going on, trying to obviously err on the side of caution, but just being mindful of that. So we haven't had any sort of big discussions about it. So what about
You're
you guys?
you're in Atlanta, right?
Yeah,
So you guys are just like
we're
opening.
we're all working from home. I mean, we've been running efficient and being productive and doing
Oh, I
everything.
meant like the state seems to be like pretty chill about opening.
Yeah. Randy in the audience says we're going to ride May out just like April. I feel you, Randy.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Cool. This is like when you invite your family to like your talent show and all you
Yeah.
like no one I know is here yet, so that's great.
They're packing in. They're packing
Great
in.
support.
Good.
No, it's okay. It's like when my mom pretends she's read my articles and I'm like, it's okay.
Oh no.
Like, you don't get it.
Oh, I'm laughing at the word pretend.
Randy says,
Oh,
anyone
well,
really going to go back to the old normal? I agree. I don't think there's ever going to be going
no.
back to the old normal. We are in a new world as we know it. So,
Mm.
yeah. George is definitely crazy, Katie. We are staying home and staying safe. That is the name of the game.
Yeah.
Staying home, staying safe. All right. Got about 9 attendees in. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll just get started in a few moments. Katie is commenting on the lipstick colors. She's saying they are everything. Yes. So Nicquel with the pink, Gabriela with the kind of the burgundy. I think you have the same kind of look vibe as me.
Yeah, it's like the Fenty floral.
Yeah.
It's my first time wearing makeup in like 2 months, so you know.
Love it.
So funny. Yeah, I'm feeling a little springy today, so.
Yeah.
Love it.
Trying to enhance Zoom.
Oh, you always do the enhance.
You have to.
All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. It is 12 o'clock on the dot. I see that we have about 15 attendees in. I know some people will probably trickling in, joining us, but first and foremost, we want to thank you all for joining our second virtual edition of PR Reimagined. And this time around, we're going to be covering COVID and hearing stories from media professionals and media experts during a global pandemic. So my name is Nikkia Adolphe. I am the PR director for Media Frenzy. And for those that aren't familiar with Media Frenzy, we are a PR and marketing agency that creates and tells stories for innovative and disruptive brands. So in our last virtual PR Reimagined, which we hosted last month, we spoke to a group of experts on how brands have shifted their marketing and communication strategies amid what's happening with COVID-19. So this time around, we want to take a step back and we want to hear from the minds behind all of these headlines that we're seeing, as the current news agenda, as we know, is obviously being driven by all things COVID. So it's really leaving little room for anything else. More specifically, we see that journalists are dealing with it at a completely different level. You're having to shift what they're writing about, what they're reporting about during the pandemic, And during this discussion, we really want to uncover those experiences from their media lenses and understand how they're dealing with this new normal, because it's a normal that we have not all been accustomed to. For the communication professionals tuning in, one of the topics that we'll cover today is something that we've all been hearing a lot about during this time, and that's really striking the right balance between media pitching. So we've heard tons of stories about journalists, I know my team has, being swamped with pitches and story ideas from PR professionals related to the pandemic. But we want to really understand how the media are looking at these, and also what are they looking for when deciding what makes for a really great and compelling story during these times.
Yep.
So we want to really use this as an opportunity to provide you all with some key takeaways and how we should be approaching the media, and even more, what stories do they believe aren't being told, which we'll uncover really quickly. So we're really thrilled and honored that they've taken out the time to shed light on these unique perspectives, reporting during the pandemic. And also we really want to kind of uncover how they foresee this forever changing the media landscape. So before I turn it over to our panelists, our talented group of panelists, by the way, to actually introduce themselves, I want to make sure you guys are all engaging with us across social. So you're following us, you're liking, reposting. We are across Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, using the handle at Media Frenzy Global, and also use the hashtag Go There. We really want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear how you guys are sort of surviving and thriving through this as well. And also after this, we'll open up the floor for questions following the discussion. So feel free to send over any questions via that chat box that you see on the right-hand side. And really just kind of think about anything that comes to mind as we talk through this, because we'll cover that after we have the discussion. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our talented group of panelists and star-studded journalists, I feel like. I'm going to turn it over to Nicquel, so you guys can, just introduce yourself, give a brief overview about, your role and, what you're seeing and what you're doing at the respective media organizations that you represent.
Hi, my name is Nicquel Ellis. I am the Atlanta-based national correspondent for USA Today. So I just kind of feel like lately, as far as covering the coronavirus, yes, it's been crazy. It's been a never-ending news cycle for the past, almost over 2 months now, I want to say. And it's been intense, but I've been focused on getting the stories out there that matter, considering what people care about the most. Everyone's lives have been totally altered from this pandemic. People are concerned about schools being closed for the rest of the school year, what they're going to do with their kids. Graduations have been canceled. People haven't been able to open their restaurants or businesses, or in some places. But I know that in Georgia, the governor recently actually gave everyone the green light to reopen hair salons, nail salons, restaurants, places like that recently. So which has kind of been somewhat controversial here. Some people kind of felt that he was acting too soon when he made that announcement 2 weeks ago. So we've kind of been covering that. I think people are really concerned about when there's going to be a cure, a vaccine for this. So that's a big story. But I just think kind of gauging what people are interested in, what's going to help them to get through this, I think has been top of mind for me. And I've been looking to cover those types of stories.
Awesome. Great, Nicquel. Thank you for that. Jonathan, we're going to turn it over to you on the West Coast.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing? How's everyone doing this morning? My name is Jonathan Landrum, entertainment writer for the Associated Press, based in Los Angeles. I cover everything for the TV, film, and music industry. And so right now, the climate, basically for us right now is, entertainment-wise, we're looking at production, how the pandemic has affected production, how it has impacted films and them being delayed, and how people are viewing film and TV shows now. And also, there was one show in particular, All Rise, where they have started production right now, but they're doing it virtually, and they're implementing that into their episodes. So it's just, for right now, entertainment-wise, we're taking a look at just how this pandemic, how the coronavirus is impacting everyone as a whole.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. And Gabriela Barkho from Digiday's Modern Retail.
Hi. Yeah, no, it's definitely been a little bit overwhelming, especially here. I'm working out of my apartment in the city, so it's ins and outs of mental health waves. But it's actually, with the virus, it is something that I've started focusing on pretty early on, I think probably February, because a lot of my reporting, obviously on retailers and, e-commerce and the way tech kind of impacts that. It's very business oriented, and a lot of, our sources were having trouble. I think my first story I did was about how Amazon really presses merchants to start prepping for Prime Day as early as February, and it was Chinese New Year. So there was a lot of, gaps in the supply chain that were not being fulfilled. And so a lot of it was actually, on the other end of it. And then, we just kept hearing like, oh yeah, it'll be fine once the ports start reopening. And, so little did they know it would be coming home here. So yeah, it's been sort of, just a big journey to kind of, touching me at a personal level here. But yeah, it's something that started a few months ago and has only accelerated.
Great. Well, I mean, we're definitely eager to hear all of your experiences, kind of diving more into details. Funny you mentioned supply chain and how that's been impacted, because we already have a question around that, which we'll get into later on after the discussion. But we're going to hop into the first question. And Nicquel, I'm going to pull it over to you first. Because of the pandemic, we've had a lot, we had to change a lot of our habits. One of those biggest changes, obviously, that's impacted all of us has been the need to social distance. So how has the way you do your job changed because of this? I mean, I know that we just had a conversation about you being out chasing stories. So how has that changed the way you do your job?
So for the most part, I've been able to do my job from home. I mean, I have remote working abilities even before this pandemic happened. I was able to work from home a lot, but I think that it's obviously become even more important to be able to do your job from home, communicate with your editors and your colleagues via Zoom or Teams channels. It's sort of become imperative. I mean, I think we've used Zoom more than ever before as a company, just for holding all of our meetings have to be on Zoom. There's a large portion of my coworkers do actually report to the office in McLean, Virginia. I have coworkers who report to the office in LA. There's an office here in Atlanta where I have coworkers as well. And all those journalists have been forced to work from home. And as far as stories go, I've been able to write most of my stories remotely, which has been good. However, I did have to go out last week when I traveled to South Georgia for the story about Albany, which was the epicenter for coronavirus cases at one point. And when I was there, I interviewed some restaurant owners and some business owners, and I had to kind of do it from a distance. And it kind of felt weird because I'm used to being able to shake people's hands and introduce myself. You're kind of used to that way of greeting someone when you first meet them, and I couldn't do that. I mean, I had to kind of stand back. I had to wear a mask, which was obviously kind of weird, and I had to wear gloves during the interview. And so I think that sort of was an adjustment for me, but it's sort of what we have to do to stay safe and to stay healthy, and that's obviously what's most important right now. So I guess overall, I've still been able to do my job and get the stories out there, but it just has definitely required some adjustments.
Yeah, I can understand, especially, being out in the field and wanting to build, some sort of camaraderie with your sources, that kind of changes it now with the whole social distancing. So that's a great point. Jonathan, what are your thoughts? How has this really changed the way you do your job? I know you mentioned early on that in our previous conversations that, you have you're used to covering red carpet events and, you know, in LA. So how's that kind of shifted how you done your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's, you know, for myself and along, you know, along with my colleagues as well. You know, we're used to going out to events to network, to you know, to talk to you know, these actors and actresses and, you know, musicians, and going to concerts and networking that way, doing the red carpets. But now, you know, everything is just so relegated to, you know, us being at home and working remotely, which now is, you know, like I said before, you know, Zoom has really played a really big part, you know, in our interviewing process, especially for our video side. I mean, I think everyone is going to be very much zoomed out, you know, once we finish all of this and once we, you know, get past this whole pandemic. But that is the way of life right now.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, it's always, you know, it's constant emailing throughout the day and evening, trying to, you know, set up the next interview, you know, for a story that I'm working on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. You mentioned Zoom fatigue because I just saw a story in Thrive Global this morning about that. So yeah, I mean, that does, you know, kind of make the case like how are we going to deal with this on the other side? What about you, Gabriela?
I think for me, it probably a little bit similar. Well, I don't really have to do too much field work. In general, I do rely a lot on phone calls, you know, a day of sort of stories, because a lot of my sources are obviously running companies and all that. So it's always been, you know, a lot of calls that I would do. I think the in-person impact has been mostly about, you know, maybe previews or some very, you know, press like events that, you know, where you would be networking or maybe sourcing. For example, if there's a store launch or product launches that you would be going to look at during, you know, some sort of evening after work thing, those are obviously out for now. So that's really mostly the impact, but we've had to kind of shift over to do everything either via, you know, Zoom or email or whatnot. But for the most part, the reporting is pretty much, you know, by phone. I don't really have to do too much field running around reporting.
Yeah. Sounds like, I mean, a lot of things have changed with you know, with this current situation. So speaking of inbox, we're going to kind of talk about your inbox, all of you guys, is with the vast number of PR pitches. I'm sure that's filling your inbox every day. How do you decide what's worth writing about? Nicquel.
That's a good question. I think I have to put myself in the reader's shoes, in every American's shoes, and sort of consider what it is that's important to them and what they might want to read. And to my point earlier, people's lives have been altered from this. So it's like you're thinking, so you have to think about like what might someone, you know, a family or someone with kids might be concerned about right now. I'm sure they're concerned about when is school gonna, you know, reopen? When are they gonna be able to take a vacation? When is it gonna be safe to get on an airplane? When is there gonna be a vaccine or a cure for this? I mean, people are just dying to know when they can resume their normal lives. So I think anything that kind of points to that or discusses, or stories that kind of discuss how we can get to that point, I think, or when we can get to that point, I think are really important right now. I also think that stories about actual people, I think, are important right now, because you have to think about who's actually being impacted by this the most. Think about people who are poor, unemployed, uninsured, people like that who are really struggling to get through this pandemic right now. Those types of stories are, to me, always resonate well, because people can feel that human connection. And I think that that's really, really important right now. And so, I mean, I think all the stories about the healthcare workers, you know, and sort of what they're having to experience at the hospitals and what it's been like to work where there is a shortage of supplies. I just think that's, people have been interested in those kinds of stories. And so I just think it's just, those are all things that I think people are really thinking about right now. One thing I would say to people who work in public relations, that we do like the recommendations for the experts, because it is good to get some expert opinion or expert advice on coping with the pandemic, and whether what experts might feel like, or what they might have to say about returning to work and how you can do it safely. I mean, any kind of expert recommendations I think are going to be important right now too. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, you touched on a lot of things that I think for the most part, it's about those impactful stories with that human interest appeal that's really going to appeal. So that's great. Jonathan, what about from an entertainment perspective? How do you decide what's worth writing about?
Yeah, right now it's all about just looking at the big picture. And of course, with entertainment, like I said before, the pandemic is impacting, the film and television industry in a major way, because a lot of people, they really don't know when they're going to get back to production. Of course, with Georgia, things are starting to open back up, which means, studios, possibly Tyler Perry, could be opening up soon. So it's, things like that, looking at possible stories in that area, and then also other areas as well. There's a story that I'm working on that should be coming out this week. It's about toys toys for films that are still coming out despite the film actually being delayed. Including that includes Black Widow, Minions, Mulan. So just really taking a look at the industry and how they are approaching this pandemic, and the reason that they're actually putting out those products, despite this film being pushed back 3 months, 4 months, a year. So just trying to look at the grand scheme of things when it comes to how this pandemic has affected everything in its entirety.
That's very interesting. From a retail perspective, Gabriela, how do you sort of decide what's worth writing about?
Yeah, so it's a little bit, I think there's a couple of nuances maybe, or caveats that are a little bit different in my case, which is the first one being that, business and retail are very second order. It's not necessarily the health aspect of, public safety. And so, excuse me. So they are a little bit different in that, I'm covering, for example, how a retailer is going to approach reopenings, or, the move to e-commerce was sort of the first rush of, coverage that we did at the beginning of the shutdowns, especially here, being in New York, it was, felt overnight essentially. But the other one is also that our audience is a little bit different in that we are not, a consumer facing site per se. A lot of our readers, it is subscription based, and a lot of our readers are, company, owners or retailer, startup sort of tech retail space, and obviously media. And so they want to read about solutions. I think we're doing a lot of these weekly sort of how-tos with founders and CEOs of brands who are kind of for example, talking about how they're handling marketing cuts or supply chain, or store reopenings. Actually, we did last week, which is deciding how to merchandise the store differently to keep people 6 feet apart, which is I would not want to figure out myself. So a lot of it is like people wanting to learn from each other, and because they're all virtual, it sort of we're trying to bring them all together with a lot of our coverage, and so that's sort of the angle that we take a lot, as opposed to actually like shoppers themselves, figuring out what's going on. But they could also be in on it if they'd like to.
Yeah. No, yeah, that was definitely, I feel like, the top of the headlines last week, especially as I was reading a lot of things about stores, malls reopening. So I'm sure that was something that was top of mind for you guys at Modern Retail. So you guys covered a lot of sort of stories that you feel are worth writing about. But I also want to kind of look at it on the other side. What stories do you believe aren't being told and why you feel like they aren't being told? Nicquel?
So I think that the Ahmaud Arbery case, which I hope most of you on here have had a chance to read about, I've been covering that story down here in Georgia. And the one issue that came to my attention yesterday was that the two men that actually killed him in February, they haven't been arrested yet. And the district attorney is saying that he won't be able to put it to a grand jury until June, which is, I guess, to me kind of concerning, because does that mean that people who commit crimes may not get indicted or charged right away because the courts are closed and because juries in Georgia right now can't convene? I just think that that's it's concerning. I think it's very concerning that when you look at the justice system and how much is being impacted by coronavirus and how cases have been delayed and things like that usually would be able to happen in a more timely manner haven't been able to happen. And I think that there needs to be more reporting on that. I had no idea or had even thought about the fact that the justice system was sort of on hold right now. And I think that's a story that, we should be looking at, is how, crimes or criminals or suspects are kind of just, being, put on hold right now.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I actually heard that story and was in shock that it actually happened back in February. And now we're starting to see, because of the power of social media, that is kind of getting more of a shedding a light. Obviously COVID has kind of ran the news agenda. So yeah, that's a great point, Nicquel. What about you, Jonathan, from an entertainment perspective? What stories do you believe aren't being told and why?
Yeah, I think at this point, just trying to look ahead, kind of piggybacking off of what I mentioned earlier about Georgia opening back up and how that will impact studios and studios that are in production, in that state. Now, the next question is, for actors and actresses, who live here in Los Angeles or wherever else, are they willing to fly? Are they willing to get on a plane to travel to Georgia or anywhere else that will start to hold their productions and open everything back up? So that is a something to really look at right now. Will entertainers, will they be willing to do it? Will they not? Will they rather do something virtually, like All Rise? So it's really just trying to take a look forward into how things could be.
Okay, that's great. Gabriela, what about you from a retail perspective?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, which we do see a lot, but the main focus tends to be on Amazon, being pretty awful about protective gear and infections among staff in the warehouses. But it's actually more widespread than that. I mean, we did a story which has actually been, ironically, has been the top read story in the past couple months, which is something that my coworker Anna wrote. The home improvement stores that are being deemed essential, which is Lowe's and Home Depot. A lot of those workers are obviously just low income, or people of color. I mean, they're retail workers. They're essentially working minimum wage. And one of the best quotes was, I think a Lowe's employee said, there's nothing essential about mulch, because a lot of them are in these suburbs where, these people who want to remodel their homes right now, during a pandemic, or do their lawns, are going in to, buy these things and obviously put everybody at risk. And so I think, it is a little bit out of touch when you actually, hear the actual workers who are just trying to put food on the table talking about, I'm here risking my life so you could do your flowers or your lawn this summer. And so that's been, just a little bit sad to watch.
So you think that, would you say that that's one of the stories that haven't really been told, like, especially from the retail side, about that not necessarily being an essential, job?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of gray area, which is something that I myself, fall into that trap. Like, for example, I didn't realize Staples was open until yesterday, because it's apparently essential, I guess, for people working from home for supplies. And so I think there is this sense of, who is essential and who's not. And it tends to be the actual people who are fulfilling this demand tend to be retail workers who are, already marginalized, but in this case are actually on the front lines. And so I wish there was a little bit more focus on the details of that versus just, general platitudes of how we should clap for them or whatnot.
Yeah, you talked on marginalized communities, and we're getting a lot of different questions on that, which we'll cover. You also talked about, out of touch, and that brings us to our next question. We're gonna get, we want some honest conversation here from you all, because you guys are, writing these stories. But, there's been a lot of recent articles penned by journalists addressing PR professionals. I've actually seen one that came out from the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, who've actually shared pitches that are out of touch with the current world situation. So in a sensitive time, what advice would you all give PR professionals, you guys being, the ones behind the headlines writing these pieces, what advice would you give them who, they're actually still tasked with pitching? How do they avoid coming off as tone deaf? Nicquel, I'll pass it over to you.
I think it's worth checking in with the journalist before you make a pitch that maybe you're uncertain about. If you have to think twice about it, I think it would be considerate for you to reach out to that person and maybe ask them, hey, are you covering things that are non-coronavirus right now? Are you interested in covering things on this topic right now? I would ask first before you send a lengthy press release to their inbox, just to be considerate of the fact that many of us have been overwhelmed by coronavirus coverage. And in many cases, that's all that our editors are looking for right now is stories related to the coronavirus, which leaves little room for features about things that are non-related or non-newsy. So I think that it's definitely worth, checking in with the person. I think I've had a couple PR professionals that have personally reached out to me saying, hey, how are you doing? How are things going with covering the coronavirus? I know there's a lot on your plate right now, but I have a pitch for you. Is there time? Do you have time to talk, or can I send you an email? And I just really appreciated them sort of being considerate. Because I've said this before. I probably get about 100 pitches a day in my inbox, and to be honest, it's very difficult to be able to go through and read all of them. So to sort of get someone to actually send me a more personal note, I think goes a long way, and it usually does catch my attention in the flood of emails. So.
No, that you raised some really great points there, like being intentional, reaching out, just asking, how are you? Adding that personal touch really lends itself. I hope our PR professionals are taking notes. So, Jonathan, from an entertainment perspective, what advice would you give PR professionals to avoid coming off as tone deaf right now?
Yeah, I think what Nikkia did, what she said is just checking in. Just doing the little things like that. And then also understanding what we cover, and understanding the type of stories that we have written before and where we could possibly go on moving forward. I'm always in communication and in contact with PR professionals. And, the great thing, honestly, throughout this whole pandemic, I've gotten, really nice emails where they have, asked me, how am I doing? What are you up to? What type of stories are you working on? So I've been getting that, and that actually has improved during the pandemic, ironically enough. So so emails like that works. There have been a few occasions where I have gotten emails, from a PR professional, and it has actually, turned into a story from that pitch. Actually, multiple stories where I've had to use a contact of theirs, and I applied it to one of my stories, and for my colleagues as well. One in particular, I was pitched to Nashe, where she was doing an IG Live performance through LiveX Live, and a friend of mine who is a PR professional, he pitched her for that, but I also needed her for other stories that we have been working on, including a Nipsey Hussle story that I was working on, and then also for a package that what the AP had been putting together, which is called "What's Happening," which details what's been going on in the entertainment industry, from different artists and actors and actresses and so forth. And so it, through that one pitch, him just checking in and seeing what I had going on my side, it turned out that I was able to use her for three different stories. So checking in, just seeing what we have going on, and understanding the things that we cover, it could go a very, very, very long way.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great insight. You brought up a great point about, even, reaching out just to check in is great, but then you never know, like that, journalists could be working on a story now, but then still being able to utilize, your source later down the line. So that's why the importance of building those relationships is extremely important, especially during this time. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Gabriela, how do you feel just from a retail perspective? What type of advice would you give for PR professionals that still have to pitch, day in and day out? How can they avoid coming off as tone deaf?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few points that I'd like to make. The first is that I definitely agree that checking in is actually something that I noticed early on, and asking if we are considering non-COVID-19 pitches, which is helpful. And, it's a nice break to answer that email versus just no, not for us. And then, it kind of also cuts out, like you said, before having to read over a novel of a pitch. I could just cut to the chase. That said, I do think pitching those ideas, I think now that we're 8 weeks in, it is a little bit delusional, to be frank, to ask for those stories without the contextualizing of the fact that whatever it is, the product or the launch or whatever it is that you're doing, we can't write about it without talking about what the implications are. If you're going to launch a new company at this point, like, we can't just act like there's no, pandemic happening around it. And so I think a lot of it is, that maybe just be aware that you're not going to just get glowing coverage without any sort of analysis around it. And then the other point is that, like you said, the check-in as far as, this is something I wanted to bring up, which is actually a story I ended up doing. A lot of, brands, obviously, like, all of pretty much anybody that you see when you scroll Instagram, they rely a lot on, organic marketing, which is basically, PR or working with these, large agencies to push out, like I said, launches or news. And what I started noticing was obviously a lot of furloughing or layoffs happening. And so, a lot of these contacts that I would work with on brands, ironically, a PR person for a brand that actually just filed for bankruptcy stopped answering my emails. And so that's a lot of it is telling. And then what happens is it kind of cuts down that chain, right? Of we can't tell what's going on with the company if they're going radio silence or if they've let go of their publicity, retainers. And so that's been something that, you know, we have to kind of figure out as we go, but it also gave me a chance to kind of get a peek into the other side, which is that, you know, it's a whole machine that kind of has to be well oiled for brands to constantly push out news alerts and all the cool things that they're doing. And so that kind of breaking down is very telling, I think,
Yeah.
on our end.
That's all great points, Gabrielle. I feel like one of the key takeaways, mainly the key takeaways that you guys, you know, really talked about with this question is, one, checking in is so important, even if it, you know, it's not, like you said, a novel of a pitch, would probably likely get ignored versus you actually just checking in with that reporter, and actually just hopping on the phone, and talking. So that's really great. Off the heels of that, I want to dive into the next question, which is relatable to the previous question. And that's the relationship between the media and PR professional has long been debated as one that sort of feels a little unbalanced. You know, oftentimes, and I've been there as well, it can feel like the PR professional is at the mercy of journalists. So I just want to hear from you guys. How do you believe both sides can make an effort to shift this? Especially now that, you know, we actually have to be intentional with our time. How do you feel like we can really improve that dynamic now and after COVID? And Nicquel, I'll turn it over to you.
Ask journalists to meet you for coffee or lunch or breakfast. A lot of my best relationships with PR people have been with those people who I've actually spent time meeting with in person. We've had coffee, we've met, you know, for dinner or lunch, and just sort of talked about story ideas and how we can work together. I think it's also really important to, you know, be mindful of what people are covering too. I mean, if you kind of see a pattern in the types of stories they're covering over a period of time, you might say, okay, well, I know that this is somebody who I can work with on these types of stories. Let me see if this person wants to jump on the phone or meet for coffee and talk about the ideas that I have in this area. Just sort of shooting me an email kind of off the cuff about kind of a random story idea, to me is, sometimes you might feel that that I'm maybe ignoring you, or that, you know, I'm not being responsive. But like I said earlier, if it's somebody who I actually have a personal relationship, or somebody who sent me a more personal email, I think I'm more likely to respond and be more willing to collaborate. Mm-hmm. So I think that's sort of the best advice I can give you, is to reach out to that person and try to meet with them in person, or at least have a phone conversation, and get to know them, you know, their career, what they're covering, things like that.
Or have a virtual coffee catch up, because obviously,
yes, in a time like now,
yes.
Yes, you can do a Zoom call, yes. Zoom coffee meeting. Yes.
Yes, I love it. And if it's personable, and like you said, you know, it's going to go a lot further than just sending out a blanket pitch, you know, just, you know, off the cuff. So that's great. What about you, Jonathan? What are your thoughts? How can PR professionals really help you?
Yeah, again, I think just understanding the you know, the reporter that you're pitching to, and understanding their beat, understanding what they cover. You know, in the past, I've had PR professionals pitch me story ideas that had nothing to do with what I was covering at all. Mm-hmm. And I would get multiple emails in that regard, and I would easily just scroll right by them, and they will understand. In that person, they couldn't understand why I would not respond, but it's because, you know, the pitch just didn't work at that moment of time. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding what the reporter, what they're covering, could go a very, very long way. Reaching out to them and seeing what they have going on their side, what's on their plate, mm-hmm. and understanding that, you know, it may, if you send them an email, if you send myself an email, and it takes me a few days to get back with you, do not be offended by it. Especially for someone like me. I may be writing on deadline. I might be consumed with 2 or 3 other stories at the same time.
Yeah.
I might be interviewing at that moment. So I might have 3 interviews in one day. And so, or I might have a meeting. So there are a multitude of things that are, that could be going on. I mean, of course, after this, I mean, I have to write 2 stories to, turn in 2 stories.
Yeah.
So, it's, there are a smorgasbord of things that could be going on. But just understanding what that reporter has going on, and then trying to figure out a way to have both of the synergies kind of match with each other.
Yeah, that's all good points. Doing your homework, doing your history on what they're writing about. What about you, Gabriela? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with all of that. And I think that's always been the case. Obviously, whenever you have a personal relationship with somebody, you're more likely to reply. And also, I feel like they're always more likely to understand your workflow and why you maybe haven't replied in a day or 2. It's not, to offend them or to make their clients yell at them. It's so that it's just because, I literally don't have the time. And yeah, again, like sometimes I think we've spoken about this, but I don't always have a fitting story idea for their pitch. And so it just doesn't make sense to keep going back and forth before I do. And what I tend to do is wait until I maybe, figure out an angle or pitch it before I reply. And at the other thing I want to say is that, I can always tell if it's a generic, email that you've sent to 100 clients. So you can't be offended at a no reply when you very clearly mass emailed everybody. I think it goes both ways. And so I can tell if you've read my work and you know what I'm covering versus just telling me, what charities you're donating to right now, because everybody's donating and everyone's trying to, get sales proceeds going to, charities. And so, and another thing, like I said, I am always down for a virtual happy hour. I think that's my Twitter bio, actually.
Me too.
So,
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to say no. I might not want to feel like talking about work the whole time, but I think it's just an easier way to get those, very detailed kind of answers of what I'm working on versus having me type it out in an email when I don't really know what's changing day to day. I actually, I see 2 people that I have been drinking heavily with in the attendees list. So they can attest, and they're both publicists, so they can attest that, I am down to drink martinis and talk about sources whenever.
Which, by the way, I know you have a martini Instagram, which I heard, which is great. But I think overall, I love the takeaways that you guys are saying, virtual coffee, virtual cocktails, get to know the person. And I love that. I know we only have about a minute left to talk through just our last question. So I just kind of want to, maybe you guys give me about 20 seconds on this, this answer. We know everyone, the average person at home is feeling some level of stress due to the pandemic. So we want to kind of hear from you as a member of the media. You have to report on this topic every single day. I'm sure, the stress is heightened for you at some capacity. And if so, what are some of the things that you're doing to combat this? What tips do you have for other members of the media who are dealing with stress? Nicquel?
I would say unplug for sure. Find some time to unplug where you're not, I know it may be hard, but you're not watching the news, you're not watching CNN around the clock, and you're not, reading stories about the pandemic on your phone. You have to take some time to unplug and take some time to, for you and spending time with your family. And, I think that's important, because at the end of the day, your job can be taken away from you tomorrow, but your family and yourself, it, to me, should always be your first priority, is taking care of yourself and your family. So I just think that just making time for that. And then, even during the day, like, don't be afraid to actually take a lunch break or go for a walk. you deserve it. You know, you're working hard all day, every day around the clock. I think it's important to take breaks during the day. So I get out, I walk my dog, get outside and get some fresh air sometimes. I'll sit on my back patio and eat lunch. I mean, I just do what I can to just sort of to stay sane, you know, in this crazy news cycle right now, because it can definitely weigh heavily on you when you're not only living it, but you're having to write about it and talk to other people who are struggling through it. So that can be a lot.
That's great. Self-care is the best care.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Nicquel just said. Just finding ways to unplug. For myself, I try my best just to get out, get some sunshine whenever I can, get some fresh air, go for a walk, maybe do a workout. I do a lot of stairs workouts in the stairs. And also I do some drives as well. Unfortunately, beaches are all closed here. Well, now I think they're opening up in OC in Orange County, but for the most part, all the beaches are closed. So the only thing that you can really do now is really just drive by and, you know, look at the ocean. But I mean, that's the best that we can do right now.
Yeah.
And that's a way to unplug.
I'm not mad about the ocean view.
Right.
Gabriela, what about you? How do you unplug? Aside from the martinis.
Well, it actually ties together because, I don't have a patio or a beach. Obviously, there's no option, and, you know, going outside is just very limited right now. Can't really even get my mail without a mask, actually. So, I have a fire escape, so sometimes I climb out there, but there's really no, there's no really outdoor for me, and I have not been as good about virtual workouts as I claim, or maybe come off to be in my writing. But no, it's a lot of it is actually, things like catching up on a lot of shows, and I know podcast listening is supposedly down, but I'm actually using this time to do that while, fixing and cleaning my apartment a lot and doing borderline remodels that may or may not be breaking my lease. So, just doing some tidying and some reading and listening, but definitely try not to look at the news after like 7-ish, I think is the best.
I love it. Unplugging and kind of tuning out. Sometimes you need that,
And call your mom.
I love it.
Every time I don't answer within 2 minutes, she thinks I'm like outside getting.
Make sure you call moms for sure. So I know we only have about 11 minutes left, and we're getting a lot of questions, which I definitely want to try to get to every single question. So I'll pose a question to just one of you, and then we'll go from there. So going back to the story that you mentioned earlier, Nicquel, what is your opinion? I'm getting this from Andre Ellis. What is your opinion on COVID-19 largely impacting marginalized communities? Should there be a relief or stimulus targeted specifically to those communities? I know you touched on the Ahmaud story, so I think we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that people have been able to get stimulus checks, but that can only go so far. So I just think that maybe there does need to be some long-term relief for people who are unemployed. And I think also people who are uninsured. You want to go back to work at some point and, or become employed, but you have to deal with the risk of exposure to COVID-19. And from what I understand, COVID-19 isn't going away anytime soon, and that we're probably going to still have some cases this summer. So people are going to continue to be at risk going to work every day, whether you're an essential worker or you just work in an office. And so people who don't have coverage or don't have insurance in marginalized communities, especially, it's like, what are they supposed to do if they get sick? You get sick, you go to the hospital, the next thing you know, you're dealing with piles of medical bills. So I just think that there does need to be some consideration for folks that are in that predicament. And there are actually entire communities, as I reported in my story about Albany, Georgia last week, or earlier this week rather, entire communities are, really suffering right now from this. I'm sure there are, you look at Detroit, places that have been hit particularly hard, Chicago, New York, parts of New York. So I definitely think that there needs to be more financial relief and health insurance coverage for those people.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. And speaking of the case that you could sort of shed light, I have a question on that. And if they would love to hear more about the case, that they had no idea that the courts were actually shut down. It's very concerning. So I don't know if you can maybe, I know you provided some some insights on it, but I don't know, maybe you can give 30 seconds into that case.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that we're still trying to get a hold of. There are a lot of questions right now. I think the big question that's on my mind right now is, why weren't the two men arrested after they killed him? I mean, people have all seen the video. You've seen that, there were two white men who shot a 25-year-old black man as he was driving in broad daylight. And so when you see somebody get murdered and a murder as brazen as this one was, I mean, it sort of begs the question, well, why, how could you not be arrested for that? And I think that that's sort of what we're trying to figure out. And to the issue about the courts, that's another question that's still kind of lingering is, do district attorneys actually have the authority to go ahead and bring criminal charges forth on their own? Or do they have to, by the statute, have to wait until the grand jury can convene? I mean, I'm told by attorneys that they think that DAs have the authority to go ahead and bring the charges forward. The police department had the authority to bring the charges forward. Even, also we're wondering too, how long do they have possession of that video? You have the video, you still don't do anything about it. So I think that there are just a lot of questions, and I think people are really hurt by this. It's a lot of hurt, especially, in the Black community. This is happening time and time again to young Black men. So there's a lot of hurt and concern about how these two men were able to get away with this, and who was the person that recorded the video and where are they right now. Heard that there was some connection between the person that shot the video and the two men that committed the murder. So I just think that we're just trying to get to the bottom of a lot of these things. And I'm kind of actually working on that as we speak.
Great to know. It sounds like it's still developing. I saw a little snippet on Good Morning America about it. So yeah. One question, kind of going back to building the relationship between the PR professional and journalist. I'm going to send this over to you, Jonathan. How important is an existing relationship with a PR professional? If you didn't know me, but I have an interesting story, will you still look at my story?
Absolutely. It really depends on what the pitch is. If it's relevant, if it's newsy, if it's a pitch for a story that could resonate, with people throughout the world, yes, it can work.
Okay, that's good. And kind of off the heels of that, because I know you mentioned after this panel, you have 2 stories to write. How many stories do you typically produce in a month?
That's a good question. I hadn't even thought about the amount of stories that I write on a monthly basis. But I mean, typically I write a story maybe every day, maybe every other day. So I mean, maybe 4 or 5 times out of the week, depending on what's going on. Maybe it could be 2 or 3 stories in a day. So it varies. I mean, it could be around the 30 mark. Maybe it depends. It depends.
Yeah, and I'm sure, especially with a lot of the influx in layoffs, that demand of you kind of having to write more stories has kind of increased, right? Absolutely.
And that's another thing too. And I meant to mention that beforehand is that I mean, of course, luckily and thank God that there hasn't been any layoffs, at the AP, but work, but it hasn't really slowed down that much at all. It's been a pretty steady pace of stories and interviews. It still continues to roll and continues to keep going. But there are other news organizations where and other media outlets where they have, faced some layoffs. And I think, that in that predicament, in that situation, I guess PR professionals need to understand that if there are layoffs at other companies, they understand that reporters who are still there, they are taking on an even heavier burden a lot of times. So that, that happens a lot.
Got it. It's good to know. Gabriela, I didn't forget about you. I have a couple of questions on your end that's coming in. And I think this kind of resonates specifically with you because you cover a lot of sort of the retail side. Are well-known brands or companies higher on your priority list to cover versus not well-known brands?
I think higher is maybe subjective here, but we cover a lot of, smaller startups. I mean, I just talked to a founder who, just launched her brand like 2 months ago and is now having to deal with pivoting. So no, we definitely do a lot of, new or smaller, especially consumer facing brands. But obviously if, it's, again, I think something that we've all said is there's priorities. If there's a, big company that is doing something crazy, usually, like I'm obviously going to have to jump on that versus maybe a smaller unknown brand. And yeah, it's, it's nothing personal. It's just that, again, I think people are always surprised, like Modern Retail is actually a team of 3 reporters. So there's a really big output, and yeah, I file about once a day, but it's all original reporting and analysis. And so there's just not enough of us to cover every single pitch. So yeah, I just have to prioritize and just go from there.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one last question, and we literally have less than 2 minutes. So I'm going to throw this at you, Gabriela. How do you manage the political dynamics of covering COVID-19? In what ways has it impacted your work, and how have you worked around it?
Yeah, I mean, personally, yeah, of course. I think it also, given that it kind of dovetailed with the end of the primary election, I think the whole, medical care or healthcare, medical for all kind of, I guess, fell out the window. And so whenever, people are talking about everything we talked about essentially with who is an essential worker, who is impacted, obviously people of color are more impacted health-wise and also literally economically. Yeah, it's frustrating to kind of hear, frankly libertarian takes on, all of this. And it's just like, well, how do you expect people to go out and do this work so that you can get your Seamless or Instacart, but at the same time, they, like Nicquel said, they don't have access to healthcare and they're probably more likely to get sick and die. And so that's something that you can't really avoid when you're writing. Even though I don't technically write about politics, it all just bleeds together because this is obviously a larger issue than just who your favorite candidate was.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I know we're actually literally 1 minute from the time. We really appreciate, I think this was definitely great key takeaways. We really appreciate you guys taking out the time. I know that you guys are on assignment, so it's definitely a pleasure hearing your insights and really getting firsthand of what, how you guys are really navigating through this. For our attendees, again, thank you for attending. We'll be sharing an email which will actually include a link to the webinar, so you can reference it if you need be at any time. And then we'll also be sharing details of our next PR Reimagine, which we are planning for June, so keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, thank you guys so much. We appreciate you guys joining us for a great conversation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Guys,
Bye.
Take it easy.